We are live. Welcome. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sunset Stitches. My name is Trevor Conquergood, and I'm so happy to be here today. We're going to be talking about. Oh, I got the wrong. Here, let me cue that up again. My slide is here. There we go. 5 tips for perfect embroidery lettering. That is the topic for today's video, you guys. And so, welcome to the studio. Come on in. Um, make yourself at home. I have some news before I get started. So, first of all, last Friday, we were live on Facebook and we showed how to make this cool embroidery shamrock with mylar on the inside. And so if you missed it, you can catch the replay. But the news is we were going to give some of these away, right? And so I've got a few names written down here of the winners for the shamrocks. And so I need to get your mailing addresses because we are going to put these in the mail. And so I hope that you guys are ready for that. I have the names right here. So before I forget, I'll just say congratulations to Carol. Carol's it was Carol Sulin Saber, Caseber. Saber. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but congratulations, because we're going to mail you one of these. You just have to get us your mailing address, Carol. The other winner, I know this name. It's Fabiola Martinez, and I was so excited to see your name come up because Fabiola I recognize from my classes. Now Carol might be in my classes too, but I just recognize Fabiola's name, and so one way or another, congratulations to you guys. You get shamrocks, and now everybody that comes this week is a winner because you get the new free font of the week, which is called Boxed. So the new font of the week is called Boxed. Oh, and I realized I updated the website, but I think I forgot to push update. So I'll have to, it's all ready to go. And so right after the video, I'll make sure that you can get access to the new font of the week called Boxed. And there's all the past ones. So for the members of my classes, of course, there's the past weeks, right? And so you might have collected Alexios, or one of my favorites was American All-Star and Zook, Memory Gummy, Ballooned. There's a growing list of these fonts, you guys. And so for everybody that's doing my Trevor and Friends Embroidery Club Season 2, or for everybody that's doing my Floriani workshop, you can get them from the archive. But as long as you come every Friday, you'll never miss one, because we always release them for free for a week. And so this week, if you come quick now, you can still get last week's one, which is Alexios. But I'm telling you, in 20 minutes from now, when I'm finished the video, I'll update that, okay? So you can come this afternoon and collect the new font. All that said, I'm super excited to talk about the tips for lettering, because of course we've got all these cool fonts that we've been providing, and I just think that people oftentimes have questions about what are the settings, what's the underlay, which underlay should I choose, and what's pull compensation, Trevor, and do I need to worry about it, and all that. So we're about to do that. I wanted to show you guys my book because I've been adding pages to the book. This is workshop number 1. And for anybody, we started FTC workshop number 1 in 2015. And throughout the years, we have added classes. It's not my current workshop. That's number 4, but we're doing a members retreat right now. And if you ever purchased my workshop number 1, you are more than welcome to attend the retreat, or you can just download the classes and watch them on your own time. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you haven't been in touch with me for a while, maybe just send me an email, trevor@sunsetstitches.com. The members could win a copy of my mom and dad's cool embroidery collection, Stitchetize Complete CD Volume 1. It's 2,800 beautiful designs, and they're all sorted into different categories, but it was kind of like the original 34 CDs that we made when I worked for my mom and my dad there at Stitchetize. And so thank you to my mom and my dad for gifting me that. It's actually a book, and then you get all the designs that go with it. But somebody that's doing the retreat's going to win one. Not till the end of the retreat we'll draw the winner. So if you haven't joined the retreat, go ahead and join now. You've got a chance to win. Okay, so I want to say thank you to Nicholas today. Nicholas is here watching, I guess, the chat for me. Go ahead and say hi, you guys. If you're stopping by to watch today's video, say hi in the chat. That is always how we draw our winners. And so, of course, I saved a couple of shamrocks. And so if you guys want to win one of the shamrocks, just go ahead and say hi, like Doreen is from O'Fallon, Illinois. That's cool. Nice to see you, Doreen. Anyway, you guys, if you catch us in the replay, go ahead and say hi in the chat box on the replay. We'll check for comments next week. So every Friday afternoon, Trevor and Nicholas do a little live presentation with a new topic. And so this week, the topic is about getting perfect results with your lettering. And so I guess if you guys are ready to get started, Nick, why don't I pop over onto my screen? And hey, Cheryl, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by today. And hi, Vicky. It's nice to see you guys. I know those guys from my classes. And so welcome to today's presentation. So we're going to talk for, maybe the next 15 minutes or so about this. You guys are welcome to ask questions. So I guess if you're attending live, then it's your responsibility to ask questions for all the people that'll watch the recording. And otherwise, go ahead and ask your questions in the recording. And I will try and watch the answer, and make answers to the post throughout the week. So yeah, thanks, Cheryl. She says, I hope I'm coming back to Salem, Oregon soon. Would love to. If you want me to visit your favorite sewing store, maybe just talk to the store and ask them to, put in a request. Could Trevor come and visit? I would love that. All right, so let's get started. So I have 5 tips. And the first one is this: size matters. And when I say size matters, I really mean the size of the thickness of the column. That's really what matters the most. It's not necessarily how tall or how wide is the text, as much as you're trying to sort of identify the thickness of the column. And so you might have fonts that are very fat, or very thin. You could also have fonts that are very small or very large. But no matter whatever the size is, large or small, what you really need to consider to kind of answer most of the next questions, the other tips, is how wide are the columns? So if I go into my embroidery software and I have, some lettering on my screen, what I'm saying is, when I look at the embroidery, if I use my ruler and I click and I drag to measure, it tells me how wide that is. Right now, mine's set in metric, so it's telling me it's almost 5 millimeters across. If you don't talk metric, that's fine. Just right-click on the ruler, change it to inches. Now, of course, I use the Floriani software, but you might be able to use these tips and tricks with any software. I don't think my tips and tricks are anything to do with programs. So, of course, I'm going to show it in the Floriani software, but you can find these same answers in any embroidery software, okay? So the question is, how wide is it? But it's not only how wide is it, it's also how narrow is it? And here it says 0.06 of an inch. So does that mean anything to you? Because, over here it's 0.2 of an inch. So here I've got text that has such a wide variety of thick and thin sort of columns. And so when you have that thick and thin, it kind of presents one of the bigger, I guess, challenges is what size can you make it, right? And I think that's what a lot of times people, they want to make fonts very small and very large. And so if we take our thick and thin font and we make it quite small, sure, software can do that, no problem, right? But when you go in and look at it, the trouble is the skinny areas have become so narrow that the software can't really form a proper stitch. And so the limits, when you say to me, like, how small can you make it? Well, if the font was designed to be very small, then that will probably be a font that has a very consistent width and one where the width of the letters has been kind of maximized so that every stitch could be kind of as wide as possible. And there are fonts, in the Floriani software, you can tell the ones that are meant to be small because they always have a little 60 in front of them. And that kind of means it's like a tip, use thinner thread, which is a little extra tip because it's not one of my 5 tips. I'm not talking about thread today, but that is true. When you do really small embroidery, that sometimes having a thinner thread means you have a thinner line. Your stitch is thinner. But what I'm talking about is up here when somebody says, how big can I make this font? Well, I think you can only make it so small where the skinny stuff still looks good. And when they're very thick and thin, while the thick side might be great, now that I've made it smaller, the thick side is 0.05 of an inch. So it's at that minimum size. That's even, now the fat side is thicker than what we used to have at our skinny side. And you can clearly see when you look at the stitching that it's almost become like a run stitch. And it's not that the software or the machine can't stitch this. It's just if you want the columns to look really nice, then you need to be concerned with the column width. And so when I said size matters, what I really mean is there's a minimum to the column width before it won't look good. And for that, I like to talk in metric. You can talk inches all you like, but for the really smallest stuff, sometimes metric's easier because then we can talk about 1 millimeter and 2 millimeters and 3 millimeters and not fractions of an inch. And so if I change my ruler back over to metric and I come in and measure this text, right here where it starts to get very skinny, if I was to take my ruler and try and measure how wide is this? Oh, it's only 0.6 of 1 millimeter. Now it's not 0.6 of an inch, it's 0.6 of 1 millimeter. And that is very small. Okay. And so I want you to understand that your needle, the actual needle, is approximately 1 millimeter wide. Let's just imagine that 1 mil. So let's make a circle and let's make that circle be 1 millimeter. So you can see when I drag here, that's when you look at 2,800%, that is how wide your needle is. Okay. Now that's not true because I use a number 11 needle, which is actually 0.7. So if you really want to see the size of your needle, it's not 1, it's 0.7. There. That's the size of the number 11 size needle. Well, so here's the trouble. You put a needle point there and then you move here. Well, the machine hasn't moved far enough to put that needle into a new hole. And so none of this really sits up on top of the fabric well. And there is a solution for that. It comes in tip number 5, which is going to be how to add pull compensation. But for now, let's just use it as a rule that says, okay, if you can't go smaller than 1 millimeter, then this text, when you select it, will only look good down to the size. And this text, by the way, when you're using the Floriani software, it always tells you a suggested successful size range. You can see that over here when you hover over the text, it kind of shows you. And it says here, this font that I'm using, this thick and thin one, has a suggested minimum of 40 millimeters, almost 1.6 inches. That's the minimum. Really? So why is that? Well, because it's so thick and thin, that it's not really suitable for small sizes. Here, I'm trying to use it at 18. That's not big enough. So if I make it, I know that in here it says it's 50. That's what it started out as. But once I start clicking and dragging, it kind of supersedes this, and now you're really, your height is determined by the ruler here. Okay, now it's 30. So this is still be less than the minimum suggested size, but you can start to see where the stitches look a little better, and at the end of the day, if you've got a font and you don't know whether it's going to be look good enough, what you really want to do is check in real close with your skinny parts and see if you measure them, are they at least a millimeter, and if you make this font at that, within that suggested size range, you'll get that's where, but you can go beyond suggested size ranges, if you understand the 5 tips that I'm going to give you. So the first one is a concept. Size matters. I don't know if there's a specific size to use. No, but understand that what you're measuring is not necessarily the height of the letter. It's more likely the thickness of the letter, and you have very thin fonts and you have very fat fonts, and you have some fonts that are thick and thin. And so not all fonts are successful at very small sizes, and not all fonts are successful at very large sizes. So, the very thin font won't look good at very small sizes unless you do something to fatten it up. And the very fat font will only be able to go so large before the stitches become too long. And really that becomes, one of the, tips that we have to learn about is, what are the types of stitches that you can fill your font in? Because if you change the stitching, you'll be able to change the size. So once again, tip number 1 is kind of a general concept that the size matters, but do you understand what matters? It's the thickness of the column. So now that you have that down, what's number 2, Trevor? And number 2 is spacing matters. And by the way, if you have a good question come up, Nick, go ahead and ask it. I don't mind if you stop me if anybody's asking any. All right. So spacing, when I say spacing matters, generally speaking, I mean, it needs to look visually good. And poor spacing kind of becomes obvious because when the spaces aren't correct, you can see them, and if where it says poor spacing, if I select that lettering in Floriani, you right click to get to your edit text mode where you have little handles that you can use to adjust your spacing. And so it's not hard to correct it. But what I'm saying is it doesn't always work perfectly when you use general math, because the shapes of the letters matter, and technically when you use the software, it's going to put an equal amount of space between each letter. And some will look closer than others based upon the shape of the letter and based upon the font, the letter style. So for example, if I start a new text segment, it will come with whatever font I used most recently. So I guess that was the Zook font. But if I even just go to a plain block font, like for example, Anna, this is just a very generic block looking font. And if you put in letters like A, V, M, N, O, P, and then you say, okay, while all of these letters have an equal amount of space between them, doesn't the A and the V look like it has way more space than the rest? And doesn't the M and the N look like it has the least amount of space? So this is about, the fact that really the A and the V need to be kerned or reduced in letter spacing, because if you put a box around the A and a box around the V, they have technically the exact same amount of space as the V to the M, but because of the shape of the letter, it needs to be kerned, or you need to adjust letter spacing, and so you can kind of move them in a little bit. And now here, I like to say when the letters are, how much of the letter does it occupy of the vertical line? See how the O occupies less of that vertical line than the N does? So the O has less, where the M and the N are sharing, a very similar line. in this case, I use a little extra space where they are very sort of similar along that vertical line where the two letters are. I'll give a little bit extra space to the M and the N, whereas the O and the N, I could maybe go with even just a little less space. And what you're really going for, I guess, is that when you look at it, that it looks good, to your eye. And so you don't always go by the math. You sometimes just check it out. And, some of the script ones, and, I own a lot of software and they all kind of have quirks to them. I'll say that. If I type in Trevor, but go with my anniversary font, I know every time I use anniversary that the T is like way over from the rest of the word, and it's just a, quick fix to fix that up. And that's what I'm saying. Space matters, and so keep that in mind. You need space, if you make text that's like, M, N, all letters that are like super occupying a lot of that same space, and then you make them, now you can see I need to fix that one for sure, because I've edited it and then changed it, it's like kind of needs to be reset, really is what it needs. But if you make these two close together, this just starts to look like all one thing. And so there is the option to add space mathematically. You can come in here and say, add 2, and it's like a certain amount, you go 2 or 3. I don't know if it's an actual mathematical amount, like millimeters. I'm not sure, but it might be. But you can see that, typing more gives you more. And so if you're doing, the front of a shirt and they're not meant to be connected, then give them some space. Space matters is what I'm saying. And if they're meant to be connected, so now we're getting a little bit technical. But here, the word Trevor, I could technically embroider this where the R connects to the E and the E connects to the V and the V connects to the O. So if you're using what's known as closest join letters, where the software learns how to make the word Trevor so that when you get there, here it's coming, the R will connect to the E and the E will connect to the V. When that happens, then you sometimes want to make a very small space in between so that you don't have a thread showing, and that's when you're trimming the threads, it's an entirely different ball game. But when you're not trimming them, what you don't want is to have the V over here and then the R over there, because your embroidery machine's not likely to trim that, what's known as a closest join. It was meant to be left in. So in the Floriani software, you have the ability to come in here and change the join. That depends on what level you own. I will say that. But if you have the top level, you can change it to furthest. And that will help your trim distance be longer for, if you're wanting your machine to trim in between the letters. Anyhow, you're welcome to ask questions if you have anything about that. But the main concept is space size matters as well as space matters, and you're meant to pay attention to those. And just mainly, I'm looking to make it look good visually. And so keep that in mind. You can easily adjust your letter spacing. Yeah, so how are we doing over here, Nick? Any good questions coming for me?
None yet.
Awesome. When I use a thinner thread, I like to change the bobbin too, so that the color at least matches. Oh, well, I mean, if you're doing embroidery on shirts and jackets, you don't have to change your bobbin. I will be honest. There's nothing wrong with changing the bobbin if Vicky's probably got a whole collection of pre-wound bobbins, but the reality is I only recommend changing the bobbin if you're going to see it. Then you really need to. But when you change your bobbin, keep in mind that if you're winding thread into your bobbin, you could actually be making that thread a little bit thicker. In other words, normal bobbin thread is actually a 60 or an 80 weight thread. So in fact, my bobbin thread's 100 weight. And so normally when I wind my bobbins, I have a 100 weight thread in there. And so if I put 60 on top and 100 on the bottom, that's very light. and it helps with the fine, little letters. So that is a good tip. And thanks, Vicky. But yeah, you don't have to necessarily match the color. I do on my bathrobe, if it's like, oh, you're going to see it on the end or the back of a towel, or any time freestanding shamrocks, well, obviously we're matching, right? And then, they match. But when you're doing text, it's not a requirement. So, but anyway, good suggestion. Okay. So let's keep going. What's my next tip? And that is, sorry, lost my slides here. Tip number 3, stitch style, right? So you now really the solution to a lot of the sort of size challenges that come up, because if you're doing text like this, and here's the font, it's called Alaska Slip. And it says up here that it's good for between 12 millimeters and 40, which is approximately half an inch to almost an inch and 3/4. And so what happens if I take this font, right now I'm using it at 45 millimeters tall. If I start making it larger, do you know what will happen? Because what happens is the stitches become longer. Of course, the software is able to maintain the density. So as I make it bigger, it maintains the density, but I can start to see the problem happening. I'm noticing it already. If I make this any bigger, you'll see it like drastically now. There's parts missing, right? It's like, what the heck happened to my S, Trevor? I made it, bigger, and a whole bunch is missing. What you can see there is the underlay. If I turn off 3D, the stitches are all still there, but notice in 3D mode that they look kind of solid up until this point, and then they go into kind of more of a dotted line. And when I turn off 3D or on 3D, it shows me that those stitches are too long for your typical home embroidery machine. And unless you're running on an industrial machine that is capable of stitching a single stitch length, because from here to there is 12, and I don't know that you need to add jumps in between, and what happens is the average home machine starts to read those jumps as trims, I think, is the problem. And so the style of stitching, when I say tip number 3 is the style of stitching, and the 3 suggested styles were satin with a split, or pattern fill. And satin with a split, so a satin stitch is really defined by the fact that it fills in an area, but that the needle points only step on the outer edges. So that's what I would consider a satin stitch. It can have any shape, it can have any width, it can get thick and thin or stay consistent in width, but it's a satin stitch because it has stitches on the outer edges, and it's a fill covering an area. So it's a satin fill. Satin split still keeps on the look of a satin, but introduces a split wherein the stitch becomes too long and it becomes a setting. So you can see it right here where my S is regular satin at the top, but as soon as it gets to be longer, we have a split satin, and then back to regular. So this, if I select it, it's all about the properties box. This is where you're going to make the changes, because if we scroll down to look at the last one, you'll notice that this one's known as the patterned fill. And this one still covers the shape, but now we have a lot of even, smooth consistency to the pattern. Instead of just splitting the satin down the middle with, by the way, this was called a random split up above. This is a random split. A middle split would look different. So these are all choices, and you can take control of them with your properties box. So when I make text, the default setting, so notice in my properties box, there's a lot of different little tabs. And the first one is where I can change, the words to say Trevor and click apply. The ability to change the style of stitching is on the purple star. It's a satin stitch. Now, when it's a satin stitch, if you want it to split or not split is an option. You simply come in your properties box and notice on the purple star where it says satin stitch, there's no ability to deal with the split. It's a whole nother tab. It's the one that kind of looks like little black dots along the lines. That's your split tab. And when I go to the split tab, this word is set to none, no split. But if I turn it on, I can have a middle split, an absolute split, a percentage split, or a random split. And if I choose random split, I can define the minimum stitch length. I'm going to choose 2, and the maximum stitch length, I'll choose 6, and click apply. And you'll notice now that my software will update the stitching. And when you look at the lettering, notice that it's splitting almost all the way through. So that tells me that here, if I measure this narrow part to the letters, it's more than 6. It's 6.5. So watch, if I come to my properties box and I make that be 7, then it won't split this area because it's not 7 long. It's only 6.5. Anyway, you can do that all in inches if you want. Just change this on over to inches, but it's a lot harder, I find, to do the measuring and the settings. So I like to do my big stuff in inches and my small stuff in metric. I give you permission to do the same. That said, it's a right click on the ruler to change over to inches, and now all your settings become inches and settings. So, okay, split satins. If I change the setting of the split satin, I could do a middle split. And now, instead of a kind of a randomized line, I'm going to get a very defined split line. Now you might be like, well, I don't mind it splitting. I just don't like it not splitting. If it's going to split, let's split it all. Can you make it do that, Trevor? Well, the answer is yes, but you need to change the minimums, right? Come back to your setting. Instead of 7, go back to 6. Now you got the whole thing. So there, you can take control of that. If you would rather just smooth it out and go with the pattern fill, then you go to the purple star. And in the purple star, that's where it says satin, but I could change it to pattern fill. Click apply. And now I have a very smooth, sort of flat texture. The good news is it's very secure. And if you're sewing on the back of a jacket, a pattern fill is a much better choice than a very long satin, because the very long satin on the back of the jacket might end up rubbing up against a tree and breaking the satin stitch. And then it's going to start to unravel. And so the size matters. And to me, the kind of threshold of where I like to make my satin stitches is really 5 and 6 is kind of the length that I normally don't go beyond. So if I change this back to metric again, and you measure, here it is at 5 and a bit, just over 5. And I think that's fine at satin. But over here, with it being closer to 7, well, I could satin 7. But certainly when you get to 8 and 9 and 10, a whole centimeter across, half an inch, 12 is half an inch. That's too long, and it's too long. And that's when you either choose your split satin or your pattern fill. So that's tip number 3. Choose the correct style of stitching for the size, of the stuff that you've got. That's, I think, important. So yeah. Nick, when I'm talking full screen, take my face out. Let's just go full screen like this, because it'll make it bigger. They don't need to see my face. When I come back on and I want to chit chat with everybody, then you can do this for me or whatever. But if I'm doing the thing rather than showing it like that, I don't see where, if there was a conversation to be had, that'd be different. But I'm just demoing. So when I go on the software, make me as big as you can. Thank you. So yeah, anyway, how's it going in there? I'm just checking in. Vicky says, I use the QS thinnest weight. Yeah, but so coming back to the thinnest weight, the 80s weight thread, you can sew with any weight thread you want. But if you make your letters in the 80s weight thread and they're not really small letters and they're kind of regular size letters, they may start to look a little thin. I would say you might, but of course you could adjust your density if need, if you're trying to do 1-inch letters with the 80s weight thread is what I'm saying, they might look a little sparse. Normally I use 40s weight thread. That's my normal go-to thread. But when I go to little letters, that's when we said maybe thinner thread isn't a bad choice. It's not a requirement. I can get it to look pretty small. I should have brought my patches or some of my small. I didn't actually take the time to get all my embroidery samples to show some of this stuff, but I've got lots of great, very tiny text, and I almost always use the 60s weight thread, especially in my patches. A lot of my patches have really tiny text in them. Yeah. Cheryl says, I find it easier to work in metric, but I need a ruler nearby to see what I'm choosing. I'll tell you my tip about that, Cheryl. Thanks for bringing it up. Every inch is 25 millimeters. And so I know that I'm just looking to see if I've got a ruler on my desk here, but the truth is, for every inch, you've got 25 millimeters. And so think of that like a quarter of a dollar. See, these ones don't go. If I find a Trevor ruler, because I had made my own rulers at one point. I don't have anymore, but maybe I'll remake them. And I made them go the same way. I was like, why does everybody always make the inches go one way and the metric go to the other? I made mine go so that you could see 1 inch was 25, 2 inches was 50, 3 inches is 75. If you think of that inch like a quarter of a dollar, 25 cents is a quarter of a dollar. So you got 4 quarters in your pocket, you know that you got $1, right? If you got 2 quarters in your pocket, you know you got 50 cents. If you know that 3 inches is how many millimeters, it's 3 quarters, which is 75 cents. So every inch is worth 25 cents or 2 bits. And so go ahead and use that. If that made your brain hurt, just let it go. That wasn't for you. No problem. All right, Nick, I'm going back on screen again. Let's do tip number 4, underlay. And this is the one, we're going to be talking about this next week in my workshop number 1 retreat. Underlay, there's a properties box. These are check boxes. You get to choose the style. How do you know what style? Everybody's like, well, I just get Save to Sew to teach it for me, Trevor. Well, yeah, but let's learn about it. To me, let's learn underlay. And underlay is one of the property boxes. It's also in your, it has its own tab in the properties box, and you can see. So let me just do this. I'm going to click on a new text segment, and it's going to start with the default size text, with the default font, whatever. Alaska Slip was the last font that I used or whatever. And it comes in at the default size, which is 25 millimeters, unless I switch this to inches, in which case it comes in at 0.98 of an inch. Well, so the question is, what underlay do you use at 1 inch? It's not what underlay do you use at 1 inch. It's what underlay do you use when the column width is whatever you measure. So once again, what you're really concerned with is the column width. And usually with text, because the software is going to treat the text all as the same, I don't have the option to put one underlay on the thick side and one on the thin side. It's just what underlay do you want? You come in here and you can see it's set to parallel. If I turn off the 3D and I zoom in, you can see it. That's the parallel underlay, right there. And underlay, a lot of times people ask me, like, what the heck is underlay, Trevor? Well, underlay stitches are the foundation. If this is when you stitch lettering, and this one here I did, Trevor, this is boxed. This is this week's font. I used the satin stitch up to as big as I felt that it would look good. And then I switched to the pattern fill to make it bigger. Nicholas is 1/2 inch. Trevor is 1 inch. Boxed is almost 1.5 inches. Sunset is 2.5 or something like that. So, but when I do text at 2.5 in a pattern fill, I use different underlay than when I do it at 1/2 inch in a satin fill. The underlay is determined by the type of stitch and the width of the column. So the width of the column helps me determine what kind of stitch to use. And then depending on that, I can determine how much underlay do I want. So thanks for that, Nick. So basically what I'm saying is I measure the column width. So if I measure the width and I take my ruler, and if the width says, and I'm going to go back to metric for this little stuff, if it says 2 millimeters, that's a bit of a threshold for me. Anything under 2 millimeters, I use parallel only. So that's one of my guidelines is that 1 millimeter, I use a center line. So if the whole thing was 1 millimeter, I could go with a center line underlay, and that would do only the walk down the middle, and not the rest of it. But only when things are very small and narrow would I choose that. For most fonts, I'll change to a parallel instead of a center line. That would be my minimum. But as the font gets wider, and here's where, it would be nice if there was a double. Maybe this is something we could give as a feedback for the software, but it'd be nice to have parallel here, but parallel plus contour here. So to me, I always make my choice based upon the thin side is what I'm saying. However thin it is, if it's only 2, I use parallel. But if you make this text bigger, so now we get it going and that column starts to become 3, even 2.5, well, and once again, it's about the foundation. You're really trying to create the loft for the stitching. And so, like, if I can kind of use my hands again, if this is the letters that you're stitching, if this is a column, if that's my satin column, if you put a single line underneath it, for the skinniest to satin columns, that might be just enough. But as that column gets wider, you put that kind of more of a zigzag to fill out that column. And as that column becomes wide enough, I will go to a contour, which will put 2 run stitches, one on either side, it draws the boundaries. And that gives the edges of the stitches something to keep them clean. So as soon as my column is wider than 2.5 millimeters, which is 0.1 of an inch, I'm not sure. I'm not good with the inch fractions. I'm sorry. Get your metric out. 2.5 millimeters, that's my threshold. And then when I get into 3, I go with at least contour plus parallel. So contour plus parallel is a lot of my text. When I got decent sized text, that's my most popular choice. So if I go back on full screen again, Nick, thanks. Then I go, what I'm saying is as my text gets bigger, I want to select this and I want to go do 2 options. So you can choose 2 layers, contour and parallel. So now I'm going to have the same parallel as before, but we've added this additional layer. And so it kind of knows, like, what happens when you put the contour on is in the skinny areas, it just kind of becomes extra underlay down the middle because the contour does have, and it's a setting. This is one of the things, if you really want to know the difference between softwares, look at the underlay and then look at the control I have. Not only can I put a parallel underlay, I can decide the density of it. Not only can I put a contour underlay, I can decide how far it's inset away from the edge of the stitching. And what stitch length do you want for your underlay stitches? That's professional control level over my choices is what I'm saying. But just the ability to check off contour and parallel is all I really needed to do. Because that builds it up. Now, if you were doing a larger text and it was going to be your pattern fill, you might feel like, that parallel really didn't do a lot. Now I might choose to go into a contour plus a zigzag. And if I zoom in, you'll see the difference. So let me zoom in. And so if I hit undo, that was just a parallel. Now we'll go to parallel plus contour. So we're adding that extra layer around the edges. And now we'll change the parallel to a zigzag and you'll see that it'll double the amount of that internal underlay. If you want more beyond that, then you come in here and you change the density. That's a 2. If I do a 1, that would be more. So now I'm going to have even more of that zigzag underlay. And so what you really need to know is that those are probably some of the most important stitches in your text. And having enough, as your text get bigger, not having enough underlay will make your text sink into your fabric and make it not look nice and clean. The opposite could be true. If you put too much underlay in your really small text, your column won't end up covering your underlay, and your underlay could stick out. A lot of times we have a longer stitch length on the underlay, like 2.5 millimeters, and you got a little skinny single millimeter column trying to cover it, and the underlay ends up sticking out and doesn't cover. Have you ever seen that? So the next tip, I think, will be probably one of the most popular ones. So let's get to that then, Nick, and we'll wrap it up. If any guys got questions, hi Gail. Did you say you just visited from Florida? So nice to see you today. Let me check in. So number 5, tip number 5. If you didn't catch them all, rewind and catch the beginning. Yeah, push and pull compensation. You know, you need to know that with most text, I add a minimum of 0.2 pull comp. Just as a rule, I just do it. You know, maybe we should make it the default, you know, setting in the software. But what I'm saying is, when you go into your embroidery software and you look in the properties box, not only is there a tab for underlay, there is a tab for push and pull. Push compensation and pull compensation. So what is that all about, Trevor? What's this I've heard about push and pull? Well, I guess what you really need to kind of keep in mind here, you guys, is that things get skinnier. You know, that's the reality, is that when you're doing embroidery, the high-speed movement of your sewing machine combined with the tension of the thread on the machine, combined with the give of your fabric, things get skinnier. And adding pull compensation is the ability to fatten things up so that when you embroider them, they look like you want to. So what I'm telling you is, if it looks good on screen, it's going to look skinnier than that in real life. And sometimes on screen, to get the really small stuff to look good, it has to look a little bit fat and puffy on screen, because it shrinks so much, you know, and that's for the littlest text. That's one of the big noticeable things, is the compensation that happens. So there's really 2 things, and I love to teach about them. There's push and there's pull. And pull is the one I just described, the skinnying, the narrowing, the, like I said, the high-speed movement of your machine and the tension of the thread. Things get skinnier. But push is the opposite. You see, when you lay a thread beside a thread beside a thread, and you're making a satin column, the density of your stitches causes the thread to spread out a little bit. And if you've got a, you know, one letter that is like the top of a T that goes like this, and beside it is the top of an F that goes like that, and they're both kind of together, if you make them too close together, it starts to look like one letter. So there's push and there's pull. 2 things to compensate for. The good news is, if you've got the Floriani software, there's settings that you can adjust. You don't have to get in and delete stitches or move stitches. The truth is, most embroidery fonts actually have the pull, a lot of the push compensation built right into them. You know, when you go to use your embroidery fonts, it's probably in there already, and you don't have to be too worried about it. Sometimes people go, why on my screen do the letters not look like they sit on the straight baseline? You know, that's the concern, is that the letters, for letters to need to look straight, you know, they need to be sitting on the same baseline. So if I change this to a plain block font, you know, and we're at 20 millimeters, so almost 1 inch tall. And I'm going to use a guideline to help with this. I'm just going to pull a guideline down, and I'm going to put it along the bottom of the Y and the T. So we want our text to sit all along the same baseline. And here's the trouble, is that the T and the E in relationship to this baseline will be affected differently, because the T, this is where push happens. Here, where one row of thread is parallel to the next, where the stitch direction is parallel to the shape at the bottom of the T, this T will get just a little bit longer when you stitch it. But the E, it's the opposite. The needle points are sitting along the baseline. This is where it will get skinnier. You know, it will push along the end and pull along the sides. And if you do nothing to compensate when you embroider it, the T looks a little bit taller than the E, and that's the complaint. And so when we come in here and we use the push and pull compensation tab, you can do your pull compensation by a percentage or by an exact absolute number. And I like absolute because I can tell exactly how much I want. Percentage might be nice for big things, just give me 10% more or that kind of thing. But with absolute, I can come in here and I can literally measure how wide is this? 2.8. Okay, so if I click on it and I come here and I go pull compensation absolute and I put in, like I said, 0.2 is my sort of go-to amount. So it brings that column down a little bit below the line. It's the compensation so that when it gets skinnier, it still looks like it's straight with the T. And if you're finding that they didn't, it wasn't enough, you can come in and put more. 0.2 is not enough. Try 0.3. And where you'll really notice it is when you make your text really small, because at 1 inch, it's not hard to make the text looks good. But when you get down to 5 millimeters, that's less than 1/4 of an inch tall. And this font says that it's only recommended for 10 millimeters. I've just pushed it 5 millimeters. That's half the recommended size. Why is it beyond the recommended size? Well, because if I measure, and I already have the pull comp on it. So let's pretend it was originally at 0. That's the fixed version, right? This is what it would have looked like with no pull compensation. So if you use this font at that size, when you measure, the column width is only 0.6 of a millimeter, almost 0.7. And Trevor said it had to be at least 1. And if I said 1 was the minimum, 1.2 would be better. How's that? So when I select this text, if I know that it's 0.7 now and I come into my pull comp and I add in 0.3, that's going to be on both sides. That's really a total of 0.6. Now the 0.7 plus the 0.6 becomes like 1.2. See what I'm saying? See how much it fattened that up? So adding pull compensation becomes especially with small text, a real problem saver because if your text is getting too skinny. So kind of coming back to the beginning when I said size matters, if you want to do your thick and thin font and you want to push it beyond the smallest size, then you may be able to make your thin parts thicker by coming in here and adding pull compensation of 0.2 or 0.3 are nice amounts to add to help with skinny columns. And see how much nicer that looked just by adding that amount to it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Did I get any chatter in there? Go ahead and give me some oohs and ahs if you want, or at least make a comment, because I did say that if you made a comment in the chat box, you would have a chance to win a shamrock again next week. It's still March and I still have some shamrocks to give away. And so I've got 2 of them going to give away this week to Carol and Fabiola. But if you guys want to win one, Vicky's in to get one because she's made a couple comments already. So if you're watching later on, go ahead and make a comment, you guys. If not, just stop by and say, hey, Trevor, I dropped in from Alaska. I bet we're colder than you guys. Would you believe the temperature out there today, Nick? It's like, what is the temperature? You guys wouldn't believe how cold it is out here. Here, I'll do it in Fahrenheit so that it means something to most of my friends. It's only 14 degrees out this morning or this afternoon. It was like this morning, I think it was almost 0 Fahrenheit. It said here, it says feels like 3 out there. Earlier, it was like feels like -10 Fahrenheit. Yeah, the wind is blowing, and I still got 3 feet of snow on the lawn. So I guess we're kind of getting a little longer winter. The irony, we didn't even have snow when Christmas came this year, but when it finally came, it decided to stick around for a while. So, thank you, Barbara. She said that That was nice of you to say. Yeah, these are all going on my website. If I could just take you to show you where to get the stuff. I never did that in the beginning. So if you've stayed around to the end, let me, I'm just going to go here, do this one, Nick, or maybe that one. I just show you guys Sunset Stitches. So if you want to collect the fonts, when you visit Sunset Stitches, click on embroidery fonts. And like I said, I have the new font ready to go. I'm going to replace number 9 with number 10. Like as soon as I get off here, I'll do it. And number 10 will be there till next Friday. And in the meantime, if you're following along, you can download all the past fonts, 9, 8, 7, 6, 4. If you're a member of any of my workshops, if you join my workshop number 4 or my embroidery club, you can get them. Otherwise, if you go to where it says embroidery recipe box, that is where you will find today's video. It will be there. I'll link in the video. There's a PDF on this page with the tips. So if you wanted to just get the PDF or tip page reminder and put it in your thing, when I'm doing text, remember these 5 things, you can do that. If you go back, you can also find our video from last week when we did the freestanding embroidery shamrock. The week before that, it was puffy foam, tips for doing puffy foam with fonts. And there's a few others that you can look backwards and find, you guys. So that's the Sunset Stitches website. My name's Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to Sunset Stitches here in sunny Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, where it's still bitterly cold, but we know spring is on the way. I was talking to the people in Knoxville today. Matt says it's 70 degrees there. So I was a little bit jealous. And of course, everybody from RNK, a lot of the people were at the VDTA show this week in Florida. And so I hope they had a great time in Florida. I've been working on the software update and I'm having a great time here in Saskatoon. Last week was Loren's BFA show, my daughter's Bachelor of Fine Arts. Super proud of her. And this Friday is her cousin Molly's Bachelor of Fine Arts. So it's kind of fun to see they had studio space literally across the hall from each other up there in the fine art studio, and such talented people. So thank you very much to everybody that attended live today. I see a lot of my friends are here. Hi, Janita. How you doing? She's 38 in Illinois. That sounds pretty cold. That's not, but at least it's melting. Here it's not even melting. It's still frozen. Not too bad. Yeah. Ellen's coming in from Norway. I don't think you got any snow in Norway. At least I saw my friend Jan in Sweden was posted pictures. They were golfing on the weekend. He went to the lake and went golfing on the weekend. So we're not there yet, but welcome from Norway and welcome to Linda from North Dakota. That's not far from here, but it's still cold in North Dakota because, Saskatoon and North Dakota share a border, right, you guys? So yeah. Anyway, it's so great to see all of my friends here on Facebook. When is next update coming? Well, Nancy, we're working on the next update, and so I can really say coming soon. That said, it's not imminent. It's not going to be this week or next week. It's still coming soon. How's that? But these things take time. But it's always exciting when we get to working on it, and we're and testing it and stuff like that. So yeah, that's always exciting for the Floriani software people. That if you don't know, Floriani software owners love it when we do an update because there's no cost for them. And when I say we, I mean RNK Distributing, not Sunset Stitches, because Sunset Stitches doesn't do that. But RNK, I'm the software manager for RNK Distributing. That's one of my favorite jobs. I love embroidery software. I love all my embroidery software, but the Floriani software is amazing. And being the software manager is awesome job for Trevor. So all that said, you guys, hi, Ori, how's it going today? It's nice to get a visit from some of my friends. Nick and I were talking about, we've been going live every Friday around the same time, but we're need to figure out how to do it where maybe there's a button that you guys can press, or so that if you're wanting to watch it, you can reserve it. Or so we're trying to get organized. We promise to do better is all I'm saying. We're learning, and in the meantime, you can catch us every Friday for a little bit of an embroidery recipe box, kind of tips and tricks for embroidery lettering and lace designs and towels and that kind of stuff. So if you have suggestions, don't be shy. Go ahead and put it in the comment box. Say, we would like you to talk about applique, Trevor. Tell us about applique. I've had a lot of questions about applique lately, and so I probably will do something for applique coming up. But I've been having a lot of fun with the going live, and so you may have noticed that I'm a little bit more regularly, and so you can count on me every Friday afternoon. And who knows, maybe we'll expand it beyond that, where we talked about it. But the retreat this week was so much fun, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm looking forward to finishing that up next week and then into April. So hi, Sally Kane. How are you doing today? Thank you for saying so. I hope you have a great day too. Okay, guys. 56 in Clovis, California. That sounds kind of chilly. You guys probably aren't particularly impressed with that. I would be thrilled with 56 today, although it would melt too fast if it got that warm. Then all that snow would be like running away too fast. Well, you guys, it's Friday afternoon. I'm going to let you go. Thanks very much for visiting Sunset Stitches today. We did 5 tips for perfect embroidery results. So thank you for your questions and your comments. I hope you guys win one of my shamrocks. We'll catch you guys next Friday. Until then, have a great day and bye for now.